Something feels off the moment she smiles, and it only gets darker from there. Stick with me to the end, and if you're into stories like this, hit subscribe for more. Maris laid my beneficiary packet on the kitchen table like it was junk mail, then tapped it with her nail. "We should know where everything is, Gid," she said, smiling too hard. My throat went tight because nothing about that smile felt like love. My name was Gideon Gid Rourke. I was 57 living in Overland Park, Kansas, and I had convinced myself the messy years were behind me. Maris Kellen, my wife, was 53. We had been together not quite 3 years and married about 19 months, and our life had been normal in the best way. Saturday mornings meant grocery runs at Hy-Vee, Sunday afternoons meant yard work, and weeknights meant dinner with the same two couples who knew our stories and didn't push. Maris kept her last name for work, so even after the wedding, she was Kellen on every email and badge. I told myself it didn't matter. I worked compliance at a regional bank. Patterns jumped out at me the way potholes did on Metcalf. I also grew up with a dad who treated money like a life jacket, not a trophy. Maris sold medical service equipment, the kind of job where you were always on, always laughing at jokes that weren't funny, always chasing the next quarter. Late January, she landed a promotion. Bigger title, bigger travel budget. At first, she came home buzzing, cheeks pink, talking fast about meetings and new territory. Then the house got quiet in a new way, like she thought the walls listened. Quick note, before listening, share which city or country you're watching from. And let's continue. Her phone became a guard dog. It stayed face down on the counter. It stayed locked even when she walked 10 steps to the laundry room. If it buzzed, she angled the screen away like I was some stranger on a bus. And she started asking questions that didn't fit us. "Do you have your inheritance paperwork in one place?" she asked one night. Too casual. "If something happened, would I even have access to your accounts? Do we have a master list of logins?" I kept my voice even. "We can make an emergency folder," I said. "Basics, numbers, contacts. That's smart." I did not say yes to the rest. She didn't fight. She got sweet for a few minutes, rubbed my shoulder, called me careful like it was praise, then her face went flat again. I told myself she was stressed, that salespeople lived on adrenaline, that I was reading ghosts. But pressure built behind my eyes anyway. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't paranoia. It was that old feeling that something was moving and I was standing still. After she went upstairs, I opened my desk drawer, pulled out my grandmother's letters, and slid them into the fire safe before I turned the dial shut. After the dial clicked shut, I pushed my chair back and walked into the kitchen. Maris came down the stairs with her phone already lit up, and she smiled like she was about to sell me something. "I found a system we should use," she said, holding the screen out before I even asked. "It's a password manager," she explained, tapping through menus fast. "We centralize everything in one place, and we stop being sloppy. Bank logins, the mortgage portal, retirement." I looked at her face instead of the screen because the pitch felt aimed, not helpful. "We can do an emergency folder," I said. "Shared basics, phone numbers, account names, where the documents are kept." Her eyes slid past me to my desk drawer, the one with my dad's old paperwork and my grandmother's inheritance letters, and her voice tightened. "If something happened to you, I'd need access," she said like she was reading a line. I kept my voice steady, but I didn't bend. "If I'm in the hospital, you'll have what you need to keep the lights on," I told her. "You are not getting full control of accounts I owned before you, and you are not getting your hands on money my grandmother left me." Maris didn't argue, not directly. She moved in close, rubbed my shoulder, and said, "You're careful, and I love that about you." Like careful meant obedient. Then the sweetness drained out of her face, and she nodded once like the conversation was over. Over the next week, the printer started spitting paper late at night, and I'd find statements stacked in neat piles on the counter. She rented a new post office box and called it "for work." Then she pointed at our mailbox and said, "Do not open anything with my name on it, even if it comes here." She didn't laugh when she said it, and she didn't explain why. Her calendar changed too, and it changed with excuses instead of details. "Corporate housing visit," she'd say, grabbing her keys. "Mentor meeting," she'd say, already halfway out the door. Some nights it was late dinner with the regional team, and she came home smelling like hotel lobby perfume, not like our house. She'd get extra affectionate at the exact wrong moments, pressing a kiss to my mouth and holding my hand long enough to make me relax. Then she'd slide a form across the counter or ask, "Can you pull up the property tax records for the house real quick, just so I understand them?" One night after dinner, she leaned on the sink and said, "We should update titles and beneficiaries since we're a real married unit now." The words came out smooth and empty, and she watched my hands like she expected me to sign on instinct. I rinsed my plate, set it in the rack, and said, "Show me what you mean, and I'll look at it when I'm ready." After that, I started sleeping lighter, and every time her phone buzzed, she tilted the screen away from me like I didn't belong in my own bed. The next morning, I pulled a manila folder from the junk drawer, wrote "emergency folder" on it, and set it in my desk. That emergency folder sat in my desk, and it made my office feel like a checkpoint instead of a room. The next Tuesday, right in the middle of February, I ran errands after work, drop off a set of documents, grab supplies, and swing by the hardware store. Nothing dramatic, just adult life. On the way back, I pulled into the lot of that boutique gym Maris had suddenly gotten obsessed with, the kind of place with fancy lighting and smoothies that cost more than lunch. I only stopped because the coffee shop next door carried the beans she liked, and I figured bringing them home might keep the mood calm. Then I saw her car parked up front, and my chest tightened because she had told me she was in meetings across town at that exact time. I sat there with both hands locked on the wheel, trying not to spiral. I didn't want to play detective, but I also wasn't blind, and her car didn't belong there in the middle of the day. Before I could back out, I spotted her outside near the electric vehicle charging stations, pacing in tight circles with her phone jammed to her ear, scanning the lot like she was afraid of being seen. I stayed in my truck with the window cracked, and the wind carried pieces of her voice when she turned my direction. "It's almost ready," she said, clipped and urgent, and then she listened long enough for my pulse to start thumping in my throat. "He'll sign," she added, and her tone turned smug for half a second. "And then we start clean." That was the moment it locked in. My stomach dropped, not because I was scared, but because I was disgusted at how calm she sounded while talking about me like a step in a process. I started the engine and rolled out slow, making sure she never looked up and caught my plate number. Then I drove through the rest of my errands like a machine. I nodded at clerks, paid for what I needed, and kept hearing "he'll sign" on a loop, like somebody had stamped it into my skull. When she came home that night, she smelled like lobby perfume again and kissed me like we were fine. I kept my voice casual and asked, "How did your day go, and did those meetings end the way you wanted?" She gave me a story with no gaps at all, and that's what made it rotten, because real days have bumps. She listed exact times, who sat where, and even what snacks she ate between calls, and it felt like someone coached her on how to sound believable. Then she slid a single page across the counter with a pen placed neatly on top. "This is a simple authorization for joint account management," she said, still smiling, "just for convenience in emergencies." I looked at the paper, then at her face, and I knew that gym parking lot wasn't about work. I kept my tone light because I wasn't giving her a scene. "I'm not signing anything tonight, and I don't sign fast anymore," I said, and I pushed the page back toward her with 2 fingers. I kissed her forehead like it was routine, then I walked to my desk, opened that emergency folder, and started writing down what I needed to prove. I kept it open and wrote until my hand cramped, because I did not trust my memory once the lies started stacking. I put dates next to everything, even the little stuff, and I wrote her exact phrasing from that parking lot like it was evidence. When I finished, I shut the folder and tucked it under the blotter on my desk. 2 nights later, Maris announced a team dinner and left the house dressed sharper than a normal Tuesday deserved. She kissed my cheek, said she might be late, and walked out already texting like her real evening started once she was past our driveway. I waited until her car turned the corner, then I carried my laptop to the kitchen table and opened our joint account. The screen loaded and I scrolled, slow and steady, the way I reviewed transactions at work when something felt off. I saw small transfers stepping out of the account like careful footprints, $450, then $775, then $1,150 a few days apart. None of it was big enough to trip the kind of alerts that made people panic, but it was steady enough to look like someone was testing drainage. The descriptions told me nothing on purpose. They read MISC, transfer, and settlement, the kind of labels you used when you wanted to hide in plain sight, and none of it matched our real life. It was not the mortgage, not utilities, not groceries, not anything we had ever called normal. My first instinct was to confront her the second she walked back in, but I had seen too many people wreck themselves by going emotional before they had a plan. If I blew up, she would either learn what I knew, or she would get better at covering tracks, and both outcomes burned me. I needed facts, not a fight, so I did what I always did when I smelled a setup. I called someone who knew the rules. Tobin Sloan picked up quick, and his voice was calm in that way lawyers could manage. He was 45 now, still the same quiet guy with sharp eyes, and he said, "Gid, you do not call me at night unless something is wrong, so tell me straight." I told him about the transfers, the labels, and what I overheard at the gym. Then I said, "I do not know if she is cheating or just plotting, but I think she is trying to get me to sign something." Tobin did not get dramatic, which kept me steady. He asked, "What was yours before marriage? What was inherited? And what is joint?" And he made me answer it like a checklist, not a confession. When I finished, he said, "Timing matters more than anger, and you need to protect inherited assets before any filing happens, not after." He explained the strongest shield in plain language, like he was talking me through a fire escape route. "An irrevocable trust," he said, "managed by someone you trust, with a clean timeline and airtight paperwork." I hated how businesslike it sounded, and my stomach turned because I wanted a marriage, not a legal strategy. Tobin cut through that fast and said, "Gid, you can love someone and still protect yourself from what they might do." Before we hung up, he warned me about a trick that made my skin go cold. He said, "They bait you into signing access forms, then they use that access to build a story that you are controlling, hiding money, or abusing her financially." I pulled the emergency folder back out, wrote it down like it was a fire drill, and shoved the page into the front of the folder. After I shoved the page into the front of the folder, I sat there with the pen still in my hand and listened for her car in the driveway, even though she was not due home yet. The house felt like it was holding its breath, and I was done pretending I could handle this alone. I needed someone steady, someone who would not get played by charm, so I called my dad. Dale Rourke answered on the second ring, and his voice was steady. He was 74, steady as a fence post, and he understood paperwork the way some guys understood baseball stats. I said, "Dad, I need you to meet me tomorrow, and I need you to keep this quiet." He did not ask why first. He just said, "Tell me where, and tell me what you need from me." We met at a little diner near Shawnee Mission Parkway, and he slid into the booth without wasting motion. I told him I needed him to serve as trustee, and I watched his face for any doubt. He nodded once and asked, "What assets are we talking about, and has anything been filed in court yet?" Like the order of those questions mattered. I told him nothing had been filed, and he said, "Then you still have room to move." I laid it out clean, because this was not the time for pride. I had my grandmother's inherited brokerage, about $412,000, an old family land interest that was in my name, and a separate retirement account I had never mixed with our marriage. Dad kept his eyes on me and said, "If she is hunting, she is hunting that," and it made my jaw tighten because he said it like a fact. That Saturday, Tobin came over with a legal pad, and the three of us took over the kitchen table. He mapped what was premarital, inherited, and joint, and he reminded me that looking reasonable mattered. We moved only what made sense and left enough in the joint accounts to keep bills paid. Mortgage, insurance, utilities, and groceries stayed covered, and every decision got written down with dates and records. I am not going to lay out the steps like a how-to guide, but Tobin made sure it was legal in our state and done by the book. Meanwhile, Maris kept pushing that innocent bank authorization, smiling like she was offering teamwork. She would get close, rub my shoulder, and say, "Sign it and let me handle the boring stuff for us," then watch my hands like she expected a yes. Every time her phone buzzed, she turned the screen away and acted like I was a stranger in my own kitchen. This was the part I was not proud of, but I mirrored her move and flipped it into a shield. Tobin drafted a tax restructuring packet for part of the joint investments, and I mixed it with real tax paperwork and a plain bank letter so it looked routine. I set it on the counter and said, "Our accountant needs this for reporting, and it has to go back today." Maris barely looked at it. Her phone was already buzzing, and she said she had to jump on a call. She signed fast, slid the papers back, and rushed out of the room. Within days, the trust was in place under my dad's management, dated and notarized clean, and separated from any divorce filing like Tobin insisted. That week I went to bed safer on paper and sick in the chest, and I clicked the lamp off with my hand shaking. About 2 weeks later, the front door opened and closed like normal, but the air felt different the second Maris stepped inside. She walked in holding a manila envelope like it was takeout, and her face was calm and set. No tears, no shaking hands, nothing. She set it on the table in front of me and said, "This is just the next step, so please don't make it ugly." I slid the papers out and saw the word petition right up top, and my mouth went dry anyway. She stood there with her arms loose at her sides, like she'd practiced how not to look guilty, and she watched me read like she was watching a timer. "You're really doing this," I said, keeping my voice level because I refused to beg in my own kitchen. She answered, "I'm done here and I'm moving on," and the phrase sounded borrowed like she'd swallowed it off a screen. Her demands weren't fair, and they weren't even realistic, which told me the point wasn't compromise. She wanted the house, the joint savings, a bite at retirement, and support language that made it sound like I'd been living off her, like I was some lazy roommate she finally got fed up with. I sat at my table and read it twice, because at 57 you learned your whole life could turn into paragraphs and deadlines before you finished your coffee. When I looked up, she was still calm, still steady, like she was handing me a receipt for something I didn't buy. The attorney letter came right after, stapled to the front like a warning label, and the name at the bottom made me snort. Chet Lang. Even on paper, the guy came in loud, all sharp language and fake confidence, with a respond by date written like it was a threat instead of a request. Maris said, "Chet is just being thorough," and she said it with that new corporate tone, like she was proud of how hard they were coming at me. Over the next few days, Maris started talking in slogans, and it made my skin crawl. She used words like strategy and leverage, and telling my story, and none of it sounded like the woman who used to complain about traffic and laugh at dumb commercials with me. One night she said, "I'm not going to be financially limited anymore," and her eyes flicked to my desk like she expected me to flinch. I didn't give her the satisfaction, and I just said, if you need something, it goes through attorneys. Then I rinsed my plate and walked away. That's when I heard the name Blaine Mercer through the grapevine, not from her mouth, but from the way people talked when they thought they were sharing helpful gossip. Somebody at one of our usual dinner circles mentioned a divorce strategy consultant Maris had been raving about, a guy who taught women how to maximize outcomes in divorce like it was a sport. The words fit her new script too well, and it made the whole thing feel less like heartbreak and more like a coached hit. Later, I learned more through Dorian Pike, and that didn't come from spying or snooping. Dorian heard it on the insurance side, the way information travels when paperwork hits desks, and he told me Blaine worked on commission in certain cases, taking a percentage based on what the client won. That explained the greed in Maris's demands, because it sounded like someone was feeding her numbers that weren't about survival, they were about a payout. I didn't confront Maris about Blaine, not once, because I wasn't handing her a private argument she could twist into intimidation. I kept everything through Tobin and stayed boring on purpose, even when it burned. At the same time, I noticed the social ground shifting under my feet because Maris started hinting to a couple mutual friends that I was controlling with money, planting that seed before anyone asked a single question. So I tightened my routine like a belt. I went to work, bought groceries, paid bills, and kept my tone even, because the best defense against a story was a life that still looked stable from the outside. That Friday morning, I slid the papers into my folder, forwarded Chet's letter to Tobin, and walked out the door for work without looking back. The weeks after that stayed tight and mechanical, like I was living inside a checklist. I did my job, I kept my mouth shut, and I let Tobin handle every message that came from Chet's office. When mid-March finally hit, Tobin texted me an address and a time, and I walked into the mediation building feeling like I was showing up to watch someone try to auction off my life. Ruth Halberg ran the session, and she looked like she had seen every version of human nonsense and gotten bored of it years ago. She was older, neat, and blunt, and the way she arranged her papers made it clear she cared about documents and timelines, not tears or speeches. She nodded at me once, then said, "We will keep this orderly, and we will stay with facts," like she was setting ground rules for children. Maris walked in confident, dressed sharp, chin up, and she didn't even glance my way like I was already history. Chet Lang came right behind her, loud shoes, loud energy, carrying a binder thick enough to stop a door. He set it down with a thump that felt intentional, like he wanted the table to flinch. Tobin showed up with one slim folder and a pen, and he didn't react to any of it, which made me feel steadier than I wanted to admit. Chet launched into demands like he was reading an auction list, and he talked fast like speed could replace truth. Full equity in the marital residence, full access to joint savings, spousal support consistent with her earning impact, he said, and he kept throwing in phrases like pattern of control to make it sound clinical. Maris sat there doing that sympathetic face, the one that said she was reasonable and forced into harsh action by my supposed behavior. I stared at the table edge and kept my hands still, because the moment I looked rattled, they would treat it like proof. Ruth didn't stop him right away, but she didn't look impressed either. When he finally paused, she said, "Now I will hear the response." And she looked at Tobin like she was ready for something real. Tobin slid his slim folder forward and said, calm as a guy ordering coffee, "I would like you to review these documents for notarizations and filing dates." He pushed the trust paperwork across the table like it weighed nothing, and that quiet move sucked the oxygen out of Chet's performance. Ruth got very quiet and started flipping pages, and you could feel the air change as the timeline snapped into place. She checked stamps, signatures, and dates with the slow focus of someone who knew exactly where the tricks usually hid. Maris's eyes went tight, and her jaw flexed once when she realized what she was seeing. That he'll sign plan she had been building had missed its window by weeks, and her face couldn't hide it anymore. Chet tried to posture, and he went straight to accusations because that was his only move. He said, "This looks like concealment, it looks like bad faith, and we will be raising fraud if necessary." And he leaned forward like he expected Ruth to blink first. Ruth didn't blink. She set the papers down, looked at him, and said, "Was there a petition filed at the time of transfer?" "No." "Then we proceed from the facts." They called a short recess after that, and Maris walked out like her heels suddenly weighed more. When we came back in, she was different, less bold, and her voice had that careful edge people get when they realize the room has turned against them. She looked at me for the first time all day and said, "Maybe we can handle this privately without lawyers, just you and me talking like adults." Tobin didn't even let me answer, and he said, "All communication continues through counsel," in the same calm tone he had used from the start. In the hallway afterward, Maris got close enough that I could smell her perfume and anger at the same time. She hissed, "You betrayed the marriage, and you know exactly what you did," and her eyes were sharp like she wanted me to swing back. I didn't give her anything soft or loud because I understood the real truth in that moment. She wasn't mad I protected myself. She was mad I didn't stay available to be used. I adjusted my folder under my arm and walked past her toward the exit doors. I pushed through the exit doors and let the cool air hit my face. Maris's heels clicked behind me for a beat, then stopped, like she remembered cameras existed. I kept walking to my car, unlocked it, and sat there until my hands stopped shaking. After mediation, she stopped swinging at my accounts and started swinging at my name. Nadine Pruitt, who ran charity events and knew everybody's business, began dodging me hard. When I texted her about a volunteer shift, she wrote back, "I am busy right now. I will get with you," and then went silent. A mutual finally told me Maris had been saying I financially controlled her, like I kept her on an allowance. I wanted to call Maris and unload, but I kept it locked down because anger was a gift in a situation like this. She did not keep it social, though, because she filed a complaint through my bank's ethics channel. The report hinted I hid assets and abused my position, like I was laundering money through my own marriage. My boss, Warren DeWitt, pulled me into a glass conference room the next morning and shut the door. He said, "Gid, we have to investigate, so do not get cute with me and do not get emotional." Heat climbed up my neck anyway, because even clean men looked dirty when paperwork said they were. I told him, "Ask for whatever you need, and I will hand it over in order, because I am not the one playing games." That night, I drove to my dad's place and dumped my folders on his dining table. Dale did not ask for gossip. He sorted the stacks and kept his voice flat. We built a clean packet with bank statements, trust dates, notarizations, and Tobin's short summary. Dad tapped the timeline and said, "This is how you keep your job in your spine," then pushed the packet back to me. I also sat down with Hollis Crane, a counselor who never let me wallow. He told me, "Do not rant to friends and do not try to win people over with speeches." When I started talking fast, he cut in again and said, "Let facts do the work and let your routine show stability." I walked out, went straight to work, and kept my face neutral all day. I did not blast Maris online, and I did not call her family looking for backup. I answered only through Tobin, logged every email, and kept paying bills like normal. People still watched me like they expected a meltdown, and I refused to give them one. Late one night, Kira Wesley called, and the shake in her voice told me she was scared of her own words. She said, "Gid, I cannot hold this anymore, and I am sorry for staying quiet." I said, "If you know something, say it clean, because I do not have patience for hints." Kira admitted Maris had leverage on her, a mistake tied to a charity ledger that Maris threatened to expose if Kira warned me about Blaine and the divorce coaching. She did not have screenshots yet, but she said, "They talked about extracting your inherited assets, not just ending a marriage," and I wrote that sentence down as she said it. When we hung up, I thanked her without making it soft, because I needed her steady. Then I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and sent Tobin a summary of her call before I could second-guess it. A couple weeks later, Dorian Pike called me and asked if I could meet him at a quiet diner off Metcalf. He was more acquaintance than friend, the kind of guy you only saw in passing, so the way he spoke told me this was not small talk. He said, "Gid, I have something you need to see, and I do not want it floating around by text." I told him, "Name the time, and I will be there." Then I grabbed my keys and left, like my house had a timer. Dorian was already in a back booth when I walked in, shoulders tight like he regretted being involved. He slid his phone across the table without dramatic buildup and said, "This came through someone on the insurance side, and they felt sick about it." I didn't touch the phone right away, because once you looked at something like that, you could not unsee it. I asked, "Is it real, or is it gossip with fancy formatting?" And he said, "Read it and tell me it is gossip." The screenshots were from a group chat thread, and the messages weren't romantic or messy in a human way. They were cold, transactional, like planning a remodel. I saw Maris's name next to lines that made my stomach go hard. "He'll sign," and "push guilt," and then the one that burned the worst, "Inheritance is the target." Blaine Mercer's replies were worse because they sounded like he did this for sport, saying things like, "Keep pressure steady, and start clean after payout," like I was a vault with legs instead of a husband. Dorian watched my face and said, "I did not bring this to hurt you. I brought it because people are getting pulled into it and it feels wrong." I kept my voice low and said, "You did the right thing, and I will handle it the right way." I scrolled slower and found one screenshot that wasn't even a chat, just a fee agreement from Blaine's outfit. The language was buried, but it was clear enough. A success-based consulting bonus tied to what the client won, which told me he wasn't mentoring Maris, he was hunting commission. I didn't leave the diner and start blasting the screenshots like a grenade, even though part of me wanted to scorch the whole story. Tobin had already warned me that counter-drama could stretch a case until you went broke on principle. When I called him after, he said, "Use it carefully and only where it matters." So I kept it tight, and we shared the evidence only in the places that stopped the smear and forced adults to take the timeline seriously. It worked faster than I expected, because once a few mutuals saw the tone of those messages, Maris's victim story couldn't breathe anymore. People didn't even have to pick sides, because the screenshots read like a business plan, not heartbreak. Nadine's dodging turned into awkward apologies, and the silence from others got less smug and more careful. Around that same time, Bree Kellen reached out and asked if we could talk. Her voice sounded tired in a way that went deeper than the divorce, like she'd been carrying family mess for years and finally got sick of it. We met for coffee, and she didn't waste time pretending we were friends. She said, "I believed my sister at first, and I am sorry for that," then swallowed hard and added, "She has done versions of this before, different guy, different angle, and it always starts with calling him controlling when money is involved." After Tobin signaled we had proof of coaching and extraction plans, Chet Lang's tone softened fast. The next letter that came in was full of words like reasonable compromise, which was lawyer language for we lost our bluff. I felt relief, not because I enjoyed her being exposed, but because I didn't have to keep explaining the obvious to people who wanted a show. When I got home, I printed the screenshots, labeled the dates, and slid the packet into my folder for Tobin before I locked it in the safe. I spun the safe dial shut and kept the combination to myself because I was done letting anything float loose in that house. The divorce did not end with a courtroom movie moment, and it did not end with anybody admitting they were wrong. It ended the way most real things ended: paperwork, deadlines, and a settlement shaped by what could actually be proven, not what someone wished into a demand letter. With the trust in place, my inherited assets stayed where they belonged, and that was the first time in months I slept without clenching my teeth. The joint stuff got split the way Ruth Halberg pushed it, practical and boring. Equity math, not fantasy numbers, and not a penny more than the documents supported. Chet's office stopped barking once Tobin kept sliding facts back across the table, and the emails got shorter when their bluff died. Maris tried one last time to pull me into a private talk in the driveway after a signing appointment, like the lawyers were the problem instead of her. She said, "Just us, no attorneys, and we can be reasonable." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "I do not do side deals with someone who tried to ruin my name." She flinched, then got cold again, and I got in my car. Blaine Mercer disappeared the second it was clear there was no big payday, which told me everything I needed to know about his Empowerment Act. Around the same time, the ethics complaint at my job closed out clean after I handed over my documentation, and the relief hit me like my lungs finally remembered how to work. Warren told me, "You are clear," and I nodded and went back to my desk. I did not chase revenge the loud way, because loud revenge just keeps you tied to the person you are trying to escape. I did one thing that mattered, and Tobin agreed it was smart. We made sure the screenshots and the timeline were part of the official negotiation record. That way nobody could pretend later it was just misunderstandings, and nobody could rewrite me into a villain without tripping over their own words. 1 month after the final signatures, I changed the locks and watched the old deadbolt hit the trash can like a small, clean ending. I repainted the spare room and turned the old shared office into a simple weight room with a bench, a rack, and a shelf of books I actually wanted to read. Dale came over for coffee, looked around, and said, "The best payback is a quiet life that does not include the people who tried to drain you." I stopped explaining myself to mutual friends who wanted both sides because I was too old to audition for my own innocence when the facts already spoke, and I set my phone on counter, face down, and rolled out my mat, and I shut the new door behind me. As you're about to close this out, can I ask you something? If you've got the hype feature, tap it to support this video and help it reach more people, then please like and subscribe. It's one click and it really matters. And leave a comment, even good story. If your spouse started pushing for access and paperwork, would you lock things down first or confront them right away?